Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest?
Welcome, everybody. We are the Goofy Historians. Today we're going to discuss everybody's favorite church, St. Peter's Basilica. So, before we get started, take a second now to hit subscribe. Okay, the construction of St. Peter's is something I've wanted to talk about for a while now. In total, it took 120 years. It cost 46,800,052 ducats, which is like 300 million in today US dollars. It is the largest church in the world still today. It literally changed the direction of Christianity, and we're going to talk about that. We will also talk about how it was funded with stolen gold and silver from the New World, as well as indulgences that were sold by the Catholic Church that just got Luther mad as a hatter. So, Joseph will start us off with the Pope who got things rolling, Julius II, who laid the first stone in 1506. And Joseph will talk about the architect Bramante and Michelangelo and some of the other artists. And then I'll come back and talk about the first Medici Pope and his architect, Roman god Raphael. So here's Joseph.
Hi, this is Joseph Whitmore, one of the Goofy Historians. Not the goofiest, that would be David. But this time we're doing a series on the basically the Renaissance popes, the Renaissance artists, and the building of St. Peter's Basilica, how those all sort of come together. The Pope, if you look at it, there's some major Renaissance popes that we're going to cover. One of them is the Borgia, which I sort of touched on in my previous one. And then there you come into another pope, Renaissance pope, called Julius II, who I'm going to talk about in this lecture. And then after that, they have Leo X and Clement VII, and then one of the Pope Pauls, who sort of continues on building the cathedral. But by the time you get to them, pretty much the Renaissance is over. The Reformation and the Counter-Reformation is going on. Right? But Julius starts it off, and he is before the Reformation. He's before Luther, like right before Luther, and he's probably one of the reasons why we have Luther, right? Simply because Pope Julius II is one of the rock star popes. I mean, he is not in terms of, being able to play the electric guitar, but just because he's so over the top, right? He took the papal name Julius, not for Julius I, who was another pope, earlier. He took it from Julius Caesar, the Roman conqueror who sort of created the Roman Empire. So what he thinks he's going to do is get church militant. What he's going to do is recenter Catholicism, which was Christianity at that time. They didn't have any Protestantism yet. It was all Catholic, at least in Europe. So he was going to make it a church militant. He was going to make Rome the center of the world, the capital of the world, right? In terms of art, in terms of in terms of architecture, in terms of philosophy, theology, it was going to become the center of the world. And to put that in perspective, before Paul, like we said before Julius, Rome had basically been abandoned for hundreds of years, right? For example, when Constantine became the Holy Roman Emperor, right, the first Christian emperor, he didn't stay. He conquered Rome, right? When Jesus helped him with, in the sign you will conquer, and had him clean out Rome of the heathens. He didn't stay in Rome. He moved to Constantinople, right? So after him, there was no emperor in Rome, and that was like in 315. There was still a pope, but there was no emperor in Rome. So, taking the emperor, the Roman emperor out of Rome didn't do a lot for Rome, right? But they still had the Pope, and the Pope was the celestial, Lord of the Christian world as opposed to the secular Lord. But even the popes at one point became French and moved to Avignon. So there was, the popes weren't even in Rome, right? So the Roman, the Bishop of Rome or the Pope was not in Rome. The Emperor was not in Rome. There was nobody in Rome, and it had no industry, right? Its whole basis of existence was theological at this point. So when there was no Rome, it just fell into, into disarray. Right? And then after the Avignon, of course, there was the Western Schism, where there was 3 or 4 different popes going around. Then there was a council who was going to take care of it. A council was going to be above the popes, but then there was 3 different councils and 3 different popes. But it all sort of settled down again with Pope Nicholas, who's probably the first Renaissance pope. Right? He got everybody back to Rome. But Rome at that time was literally, if you go to the Forum now, you see the Forum with the old Roman Forum. At that time, when Nicholas came, it was actually filled up with trash, right? That had been, 1,000 years of trash had accumulated, and you couldn't see. It was probably 10 feet worth of trash, and then dirt was over it, and there was cattle, sheep, shepherds, everything. So nobody could see ancient Rome. They could see some of the smaller parts of the Catholic Church, which was up the river a little bit. But with Nicholas, so when Nicholas came back to Rome, right, he had to re-civilize Rome. So Nicholas was the Pope, who was going to get the roads paved, get the aqueducts coming, get some type of sanitation, get Rome City back on its feet again, right? But there's still the Basilica of Constantine sitting there that has been sitting there for 1,300 years, and it was falling apart, right? So that was Nicholas. So then after Nicholas, there was a series of popes who, kept trying to rectify the Basilica of Constantine. And there was, and it was the beginning of the Renaissance. People were getting into art. So at this time, there was different families competing to be the Pope. Right? So one of the families was the Della Rovere, another one was the Borgia, another one was the Medici, right? So we're talking about Julius, right? So Julius was born from a proud but poor family, right? I mean, they were nobility, but they had lost their money at one point. Julius, when he was a kid, had to take a summer job taking care of pigs in somebody's backyard. So what do you do if you're a poor noble family that still noble, but you're poor? Well, you go into the clergy, right? You send your family into the church clergy, because at this time there's the temporal world and there's the religious world, and they're both equally powerful, and they're competing for powerful, and they're all rich, right? So you go into the church, right? Because remember, at this time there was no Protestantism. Europe was Catholic, and that's pretty much all it was, right? I mean, Catholicism had, Europe in a death grip for 1,500 years up until Luther, right? And then after that, it went into the Holy Wars. But so how do you become Pope if you're starting out as a poor but proud aristocrat, right? You go into a curia, and it's nice if you're like a nephew of a pope, a previous pope, right? And this was what happened with Julius. Actually, he was related to 3 previous popes. Sixtus, who was the 16th chapel. There was Gregory of the Gregorian Reforms, and some other popes. So he was set up. I mean, and he got all the education, and he was very sprite, and he was very aggressive. He was not very religious, though, actually. He was not very religious at all. But he was very practical and very intelligent and very aggressive, right? And one of the things you will see, like if you'll see today, you'll see, if you look on Google, right, or YouTube or something and look at Pope Julius, you'll see a painting of him by Raphael, right, which is one of the most famous paintings of popes. He's the one who set like the portraiture concept of popes. But you have to remember that portrait was actually painted when he was really old, right? And it wasn't even painted until the painting wasn't completed until after he was dead, and that was not released to the Republic until 20 years after Julius was dead. And I'm sure Julius would be very pissed at this portraiture because it reveals him as a very old, very weak, sort of decrepit old man, like barely holding on to his seat. Looks like he's going to fall over. That's not the image Julius wanted to portray. If you look at some earlier, they do have earlier pictures of him, and he looks more like a linebacker, right? If there's anything similar, he'd be like Henry VIII, right? If you see a very strong, muscular, stout, focused person who's gonna take, the papacy by storm, right? So he was focused on becoming the Pope because he wanted to reform the Pope, the papacy, and make it the Rome and the center of the world, the light, the light of the world, and all the emperors and everybody would come and bow down to him. But he was going to do it through actually military force, right? Because you couldn't do it any other way. The whole thing had drifted so far away with the scandal of the Avignon and the conciliary movement and the multiple popes. He needed to focus, and he needed to get it set and get it going. And he also wanted to make it beautiful, right? He used art as a weapon. He used everything he could as a weapon, right? And he was a very, very involved Pope. So he was like 45. He was ready to become Pope. He had bought all the cardinals because his family was, like I said, he was the nephews of several popes. So there was Della Rovere. There was a lot of cardinals who were, the cardinals are the one who create the Pope, right? So he thought he was all set up. But the Borgia Pope came in and undercut him, paid off more. Some of the cardinals were more susceptible to bribery just because they were a Della Rovere. Doesn't mean they want a nice palace somewhere. So Borgia becomes Pope first. So what does the future Julius do? Does he stay in Rome, and hold his own and try to keep things going in Rome? No, he leaves. Well, first of all, because the Borgia Pope is trying to kill him, right? He's setting his rival up to be assassinated. So he runs away to France, right? And he doesn't live in peace in France. He actually talks to the French king, right? And he tries to get another council going to overthrow the Borgia, and he gets the French to get an army and go down and attack Rome, right? And he does. I mean, the French does go down to Rome, and the Borgia Pope has to hide out in the Castillo d'Angelo. So the Borgia Pope ends up being in jail, right, by Julius. It's not a good start, right? You're almost getting two popes again, right? You're going back to the multiple pope papacy thing going on. And just to remind you, Netflix has a whole series on the Borgia popes, right? And so it goes Borgia, then it goes to Julius II, and then it goes to Medici popes, right? Which are Leo X and Clement VII, right? And Netflix has a whole series on the Medici popes, right? So, but they have no series on Julius, right? Which is a shame. I think Netflix should spend some time and do some time with Julius. There is the movie, The Agony and the Ecstasy, where Julius shows up. It's a novel that became a movie, and with awful betrayal of Michelangelo by Charleston Heston. You think like Michelangelo is like holding some type of gun under his robe, right, to start shooting everybody. but it is redeemed by Charleston Heston, right? Who's actually Pope Julius. Right? So if you want to get into that, you can look, but it's dated. It's very dated. Netflix needs to update it and do one on Julius. So let's talk about Julius. So the Borgia Pope, Alexander VI, he finally dies, right? But in the meantime, while he was alive, he said he had like, 6 different kids, 3 kids. The Cesare was one of them, and Lucretia was his daughter, and he set them up as in kingdoms in the Papal States and different parts of Italy. Alexander VI's goal was to unite Italy under the Borgia, right? Make that their new kingdom beyond just the papacy. So there'd be a papal, there'd always be a papal pope who's a Borgia, and all the kings and princesses would be Borgia, and Italy would be a Borgia state. But he dies too soon, and what they do is they try to go. Well, Borgia was so over the top. He was probably the most corrupt pope of all time. Which makes him the most interesting, right? So that's why Netflix does a series on him. He set up his kingdom, right? So he's dead, and the cardinals goes, wow, we can't do that again. We can't do that again. We got to get a real pope, right? Who's like holy, right? Like like the Dalai Lama or something, right? You need to get something holy, right? Instead of these worldly popes. And so they did. They got this guy called Pius II, right? Which is Pius IV, and what you don't want is any pope named Pius, right? Because they're going to be entitled holier than thou, right? And that's what he did. He pretty much shut down. He was going to, so all these people always talk about going back on crusades, right? But nobody wants to go on crusades anymore, right? So Pius IV goes down. Now we're gonna have to go fight the Muslims again because they're Muslims and we don't like them, and we're gonna go fight them. So he calls a crusades to go fight the Muslims, and this time in the Ottoman Turks. And he goes to Venice, and nobody shows up for his crusade. And then he gets all depressed, and then he dies. So he was only a pope for like less than 4 weeks, right? And the theory goes that it's probably actually Julius II that had him poisoned, right? Because he spent all this time waiting to get through the Borgia popes. Now he has to sit through Julius and a crusade. So he's out of it. He comes back to Rome. Julius takes over and becomes the Pope Julius II. And that's where we start. That's where I should have started probably a half hour ago, right? But so the first thing, you go, well, what do you do? What does the world need now? What does Catholicism need now more than anything in the world since he's Pope, right? They've gone through plagues and wars and fires and apocalypse. Everything's going on. What do we need, right? He says, what we need is a huge tomb to me, right? The first thing he wants to do is to make a tomb to himself, right? But this, when you're a pope, you get to choose your tomb where you're going to be dead in. You get to, they have like a little catalog book. You can go through and pick out the tomb you want. But none of those were good enough, right? But you can go to the Vatican now. I've done that. You go to the Vatican, go down to the basement, and you can look at all these tombs of old dead popes, right? And the modern popes in the last, 50 years, they're all like very modest. They're nice, clean, like just a plaque, right? But you go back further, they get more elaborate. There's like statues and, spooky shit going on. But none of that was enough for Julius. He wanted a tomb beyond all tombs, right? He wanted the mega tomb. It was going to be like 40 feet by 30 feet by 60 feet. It was going to be huge, right? It was going to have like 44 statues plus a statue at the top, not of Jesus or an angel, of him, right, holding a sword, right? That was Pope Julius, right? He was very much over the top, right? And so that's the first thing he wants to get going after he becomes Pope, right? Before anything, right? And so when he first comes back to Rome, he's going through this dilapidated old cathedral, Basilica of Constantine. It's falling apart. Things are falling from the rafters. Dead saints are falling out of the walls. So But in one part in the very back, there's like a little room in there that has a statue of Mary and Jesus, right? And it was actually carved by Michelangelo when he was like 22 or something. It was like stuck in the corner there. But Julius sees that and he goes, "Oh my God, that is really good." I mean, he may be a jerk and an asshole, but he knows, he has good taste, right? So he says, "Find this artist and bring him here," right? So again, Julius, Michelangelo is only like 25 or something. He gets this call from the Pope. You know, he sends him a text, and what do you do? You know, and the Pope sent him traveling money because, you know, he was living with the Medici actually, right, in the Medici palace. But anyways, he comes to Rome, and Julius says, "I want you to build you. I want you to build me this tomb, this gigantic tomb, right, of you know of marble, this big marble tomb." Yeah. And so Julius goes, "Well, what is it?" And they drew some pictures, and before 40 statues was a big statue, you know, and it took him a year. So he had already made David. That was one of the first ones. So David was already released. So he was already pretty famous, at least in Florence, for his David and his Pietà. But so he looks at this thing, and like it took him like a year to make David, right? So this one has like 45 statues plus the big statue on top, and all the, you know, the knickerbracks and all the little stuff going on the side. So it would estimate it would take, you know, Michelangelo 40 to 50 years to complete this tomb. It was going to take a long time, but for Michelangelo, when you're 22, that's a career, probably more than a career. I mean, most people's 25, you know, 40 years, it'd be 65. That's the average, a good lifetime back then, right? So he was going to be set up for life, just carving this tomb for Julius, right? But he gets, but you know, they're looking at this tomb that he's making, and they actually went to Julius went in. Not Julius. Michelangelo actually went to, you know, the rock quarry for the marbles and picked up all the marbles himself, and, you know, drug it all back to Rome. And he's like, oh man, starting to chip away at it. And again, insight, like when Michelangelo starts like chipping away, like Julius is like looking over his shoulder the whole time, right? He's like, it's like if someone told you to write a program at work, right? And then your boss just sits down next to you and watches you write your program, right? It's like, like they're going, what's next? What's next? I go, what's next? It's like, you leave and then I'll write the program, right? This is the way things work. You don't be my boss and then like breathe down my throat. So so Julius is like, and Michelangelo is getting all annoyed by this stinky Pope, you know, looking over him. He was like the Pope's old now, right? And he's like, I don't know. It's just sort of creepy, right? He's micromanaging Michelangelo, right? But then, like, all of a sudden, he goes, well, you know, I want to put this tomb in St. Peter's Basilica, right? This old thing that's fallen apart, right? He wants to take this huge tomb and like put it right in the center of the Basilica, right? But the center of the Basilica is right over where like St. Peter is buried, right? Supposedly, that's what his bones, right? I don't know if they've ever done any DNA, you know. But he's going to put his triumphant tomb over St. Peter with, you know, Julius up on top, right? And poor little Peter on the bottom with his little decaying bones. So, but he realizes that if you put this thing in the Basilica, there's going to be no room to say Mass, right? There's going to be no room for anything. It's going to take up all the room. You probably have to knock down some walls. So most people would go, well, you know, if you can't fit it, and maybe, you know, scale it back, right? Make a smaller tomb. You don't need, you know, 40 times, you know, 40 feet times 30 feet times 60 feet tomb, right? You can just have a little tomb like a normal Pope, and then you can fit it in, right? Even if you don't want to be down in the crypt, you can be up on the top, you know, smaller and over to the side, maybe not over St. Peter, right? Be a good idea. But no, that's not what Julius says. Julius says, well, if we can't fit it in the old cathedral, we'll just knock the old cathedral down and build a new one, right? Besides, the old one's like falling apart, right? So he goes, no, we're going to build a new basilica. So that's how the basilica got started, right? It was Julius who said, tear the thing down, build a new one. So he gets this. So one day, Michelangelo is tapping around making his tomb, right? And he realizes that Julius isn't there, right? He's like silent. He goes, oh man, this is great. So he starts really getting some work done. And then they bring him some new marble, and they're supposed to sign an invoice for the marble they got. And so he walks over to the Vatican. Actually, so what happened? Julius wanted to pester Michelangelo so much, he created a little bridge, between the Vatican Palace and where Michelangelo was working, right? So he could just go back and forth without going on the street. Anyway, so Michelangelo goes over to the Vatican with his bill of lading, right? His little invoice. He wants to get paid by the Pope, right? Or have the Pope pay for the marble for his tomb. And the guards won't let him in, right? And he goes, no, you can't come in. The Pope's busy. And he goes, Julius, well, he wasn't busy, when I was trying to make the statue. Now he's busy when I have an invoice, right? So he keeps coming back and coming back and coming back, and every day trying to get the Pope to pay the invoice. Finally, Michelangelo had to pay the invoice himself for the tomb, for the marble of the tomb of Julius. And Michelangelo stopped getting paid, right? There was a cash flow problem, right? Mainly because the Borgia Pope had completely depleted the Vatican coffers. The bank, they were in debt when Julius took over. So there really wasn't a lot of money coming in. And he wants to do all this reconstruction and build a basilica. But what happens is that Julius got all over the top on this basilica, right, that he was making. And he hired Bramante. He's like the most famous architect of the Renaissance. He's like the Michelangelo was to culture, the Bramante was architecture. So he's like pestering. No, he's not pestering Michelangelo. He's like breathing down the neck of Bramante, doing the designs and creating the basilica, looking at the Duomo in Florence and the Pantheon, down the street, planning it, how it was going to be, where he's going to put his tomb in there, right, and make it all fancy. And so Julia, Michelangelo was fine with that, right? Just let me build my, my 40 statues.
Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Does history repeat itself? Not really. But sometimes it kind of rhymes.